As a soul, you are here to bring more of God's good into your own life and the world. You may have heard in the past that God's will is when bad things happen in your life. You may have had ministers, pastors, and spiritual teachers tell you these things. Be assured, God's will for you is good. And if you believe that, there must be a way to bring about this good through the practice of spiritual principle. Beginning Monday, June 7, we will begin a 7-week study of these powerful principles from 7 Spiritual Laws of Release. 7 principles for 7 weeks at 7 p.m. on June 7. We look forward to you joining us for this important time on your spiritual journey. Head over to www.cynthiaaliceanderson.com to register today. Thank you to everyone who has already registered for this course. We look forward to supporting your journey.
Supportek Staffing and Center for the Healing Arts present The Authentic Spiritual Journey, a weekly show featuring real and practical spiritual conversations from diverse perspectives here on the Experience of the Soul podcast channel. Today, episode 152, a conversation with Rev John McLean of Unity of Nashville. And now your host, Rev Cynthiaaliceanderson.
Hello and welcome to the Authentic Spiritual Journey. My name is Cynthiaaliceanderson. I'm the host and I am not in 818 Studios today. I almost said it by accident because I'm so accustomed to welcoming you to the studio with me. But today I'm in the field. I'm in Nashville, Tennessee. I almost said Nashville, Florida. I'm in Nashville, Tennessee at Unity of Nashville with someone who is very special to me, Rev John McLean. John, thank you so much, and welcome to the show.
Welcome to Nashville, and hello, friends.
Friends, I'm really glad that you're going to finally meet this person who is so dear to my life. And I learned so much from John all the time. I've known him about 25 years, and we began our ministerial journey together. And our journeys have often been parallel. But what I find so amazing about our friendship is that it never gets old. And we're always inspiring one another because we're both always growing. So John, I can't say enough, that you are my dear friend. You're my son's godfather.
Right back at you. You know that.
Yeah. And so the reason I wanted to bring you on is I always learn so much from you about how you think about the world. Like right now, there's so much going on. There's been political unrest. There's been a shift in race, how we talk about it. There's a lot going on in the world. Tell me what's on your heart right now. And it could be anything from what book you're reading to what's on your heart about what's going on in the world.
It's a big question, isn't it? Without wanting to sound like a class, the thing that's occurring to me is that, Emerson says that prayer is the contemplation of the facts of life from the highest point of view. And when I say that, I know what I mean when I use that quotation, but people really are not sure what I'm trying to get at when I say it. And when they say, well, what do you mean contemplating the facts of life from the highest point of view? What point of view is that? And I'll say, from the moon.
Yes.
It's literal. It is not a metaphor for consciousness, highest point of view, or the rightest place or the rightest thought about it. But for me, it's most useful when you're talking about the greatest distance. So all things appear in right relationship, which is the way they were created to be.
Yes.
If you're on the moon, and we know what the picture of planet Earth looks like, you know that political boundaries are artificial.
Yes.
That there is one world. There is one body of water, which is all interconnected.
Yes.
And that land is land. And we know about plate tectonics. We know that it's changing. even now.
Yes, the continental drift theory
is still adjusting itself all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I was just in southeast Tennessee last couple of days, and in the Cumberland Plateau, there's just sheer drop-off of hundreds of feet in certain places. And when you're in that highest point of view, you're going, oh my gosh, this was all underwater sometime.
Yes.
The highest point of view is really understanding that this is one living thing.
Mm. Yes.
Which is still in process, which hosts more life forms than we can count, even now. And yet we have artificial distinctions between who we are, as well. From the moon, you would know that planet Earth is inhabited by Earthlings.
It kind of levels the playing field.
It kind of levels the playing field. Mm-hmm. And I think that if we were really aware of that, it would be obvious to say that there is one race, and that's the human race. And that anything else we've made up is an artificial distinction.
Mm-hmm.
And there clearly is no difference between the peoples as they're created.
Right.
So this is the kind of highest point of view that I always ask myself to reflect upon. The big movements of history, the big movements of landmass, the big movements rather than the very, very, very particular, which can reinforce notions of identity and separation
mm-hmm.
and lead to dead ends rather than greater opportunities.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And you've helped me in just languaging some of this because, as much as I am happy that there is new dialogue about race, as much as I'm happy that there is a greater acceptance in some ways in our world than ever, in so many ways, though, we are separating ourselves needlessly, I believe.
Yes.
And I don't think it's going to get us to the place we think it will.
It's like, yes, there's so much variety within human life forms. And how do we celebrate that rather than judge it and put artificial value judgments on this is more valuable than this or this is more valid than this? So I think I hope from this high point of view that we're moving into a place where the recognition and validation of all individuals will be equal,
mm-hmm.
but yet we will celebrate them. Sometimes I use the expression, the world I was born into, America, was called the Great Melting Pot. The Great Melting Pot means you all come together and forget the country you came from and try to be white and fit in.
Yeah, that's the subtext of that.
That's the subtext.
Exactly.
Of the melting pot. And as facetious as this may sound, I like to think of this as the great salad bar. Or if you go to Whole Foods, it's the great olive bar. That you don't think the Clamato olives are any more valuable than the Spanish olives,
mm-hmm.
but they're different and they each have their use and they each have their joy and they each have their flavor and they each have their style and they each have but it's like, no, I don't want them all mushed together. I want to celebrate all the different identities and know that they are of equal value.
Yes, I still, like from my perspective, I don't understand what is so scary about that to so many people, it seems. And it's not just whites, but it is certainly, driven, what you're talking about is driven by white culture, but it's not just white culture. I mean, I've learned, because I have many friends from, Puerto Rico and Mexico, and I've learned over the years that there's tension there. And so, in my naivete, I thought, all the brown people love each other. And somebody said to me, no, not exactly. And I said, well, tell me more.
There are distinctions everywhere which are artificial that just, well, sidebar here, listener friends. Reverend Alice spoke at Unity in Nashville Church today and talked about us versus them. This is the basic construct, but that's really only helpful when you're 2 years old.
Exactly.
And if we're going to function on this planet, we have to get beyond this artificial distinction between us versus them if we're going to have an adult experience of life. And I think what we've all learned the last 4 years in this country is that we are not as close to having an adult culture in this country as we flattered ourselves to think we were.
I agree.
We're not nearly as close. And there's a great deal of work to do, but it's work in education. It's work in acceptance. It's work in forgiveness.
Yes.
But let me bounce back. I have to say, I truly do not understand one's sense of threat to identity.
Yes, I don't either.
I find, for listeners, I'm as Anglo as you can possibly be. 98% Celtic and 2% Neanderthal. 23andMe told me that.
You got your test?
I got my 23andMe.
Uh-huh.
I was kind of hoping there'd be a little something from Africa or Asia, but 98 and 2.
Uh-huh.
And when people say, well, people are afraid, and that's why they act out, or that's why they become defensive, I still don't understand of what. Because for all its faults, the country we live in still is the biggest market on planet Earth. There is not a shortage of anything.
Right.
Distribution has always been an issue, will always be an issue. But there is not a shortage here.
Right.
And I don't truly understand when we say that, well, people are afraid and so they hold on, they double down on religion, or they double down. I still have to say, afraid of what? Who is there to be afraid of?
Well, and I see that, even very strongly in, spiritual circles where, we tend to think maybe we're above all that. And what I've seen is that if you're unlike me, then there has to either be a fear, a fear response or an anger response, which of course anger is just masking the fear. So it's really ultimately just a fear response. But I see it in relation to political parties mostly. But even around race, and maybe LGBTQ some, but the hot button right now is race. And there's still fear from very people who I see call themselves spiritual. Now, posting things, I see it on Facebook, and I'm going, this is not life from the highest perspective. This is not seeing things from the highest perspective.
It's an amazing time. I mean, I have my own thoughts about why things are the way they are right now, and that we are in a self-correcting phase. As we're overreacting to political correctness.
I totally agree.
And this is difficult because it is perhaps a threshold that we're crossing right now. I think this is it's a little simplistic, but it's not misleading. When we talk about modernism, the modern age, we're talking about the age of enlightenment, the age of science, the age of reason, 1700s through the Industrial Revolution, and hierarchy, still the reinforcement of hierarchy and patriarchy. When we talk about postmodernism, we're talking about in the broadest sense, justice making,
Yes.
the leveling of the playing field. There are no longer gatekeepers. Now I'm 68. The world I was born into had gatekeepers in every area of our cultural life. That if you wanted to know what was popular music, there was a Billboard 100. If you wanted to know who the hot entertainers were, Ed Sullivan would choose them and tell you
Right.
who they were. If you wanted to know what was happening in New York or in politics, Life magazine would tell you who they were. It was all very neat in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you say, well, what's a popular song? Well, you go, well, in what?
Right.
Because even the top-selling album of any category, you're talking about 10,000 units. You're not talking, and Michael Jackson's Thriller sold 30 million copies. That world is completely irrelevant now. It is so siloed.
Yeah, that's a great word for it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we're also in this place where, in this correction, this is my opinion, in correcting the evils of patriarchy and hierarchy, this postmodern era that we're still in has a flattening of all the categories, where it says, well, just because you live in New York doesn't mean you know what's happening culturally in the world or in finance.
Yes, even though traditionally that was seen as the
center, and
the
so
center.
they must be right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we do have this more flattened experience now, more democratic, where there's some areas there's a low bar to entry, but I want to be articulate and say this correctly. And even with movements like Black Lives Matter, where we say, my life is as valid as your life.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that is the helpful subtext of this whole movement.
Yes.
My life is as valid as your life. Yes, of course it is.
Mm-hmm.
But historically, it has not been.
Exactly.
And so we're being asked to look at this for the first time. Where we get in trouble is what I feel, and this may make this podcast unairable, what we've been through the last 4 years is my ignorance is as valid as your wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why the last 4 years have been so stressful.
Yes.
As we are desperately continuing to trying to make sense that my lies are as valid as your truth.
As your truth, yes.
As your facts.
That's what I was going to say. Alternate facts.
My alternate facts are as valid. Well, you can say them, but they don't become normative. You can't build any experience on them. They're self-limiting because they're not real.
Exactly.
So you can keep telling a story, but it has no legs to it. And that's the absurd experience I do think that we're living in. And I really do believe that has been extremely stressful because it has been a form of abuse.
Yes.
Of trying to say, okay, well, when women were wanting to say my life experience is as valid as a man's, okay, we all learned to say that. When gay people wanted to say my life is as valid as cis hetero life, okay, we all have to learn to say that. Now, my lies are as valid as your truth. Oh, do I have? Wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I have to say yes because that's what we're being forced
to do. Yes.
And where does this end? And this is very stressful. We know that maybe it's just beginning. or it's going to go on for a long time? And how does that self-correct itself? Well, spiritually, Thomas Troward wrote that all things that are ultimately not in accord with principle are self-limiting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a negative statement. Dr. King's positive statement that, what is it, in the long run, the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice. Will that be in my lifetime? No. But ultimately, because it is in accord with the harmony, the essential harmony, that yes, that is the inevitable consequence. And when you're not in accord with harmony, truth, truth meaning truth, then that's going to die of its own weight, ultimately.
Well, we're talking about survival of the species at this point. If something doesn't change, we won't survive long term. Because now it's about whoever has the biggest gun and can convince the largest number of people, not tell the truth, but who can convince the largest number of people. So, like you say, long term, that's not going to bear out because, as you say, it has no legs. There's nothing to support it.
Yeah.
What I think ultimately that's happening is that there is consciousness is trying to evolve. I do see that that's happening. And I was thinking back recently about, I was talking with a group of people, and we were discussing how in the 70s, the Native American movement called AIM, which stood for American Indian Movement, is not unlike what we're seeing with Black Lives Matter. And after this big eruption of energy, what happened was a resurgence in a pride of culture, right? And so that's what I'm hoping is next. that somehow culturally there is a new pride, there's a new energy, but I hope that I hope that's the direction we're heading.
Well, if you look at it from a principle-based way, that is the inevitable consequence, but there's got to be a watershed. There's got to be a certain mass of people that are in accord with that. And, you're doing your part to make that a reality, and I'm doing my part to make that a reality, to invite people always to love change, which is what I tell my folks in my church consistently for 20 years, that we are here to practice change.
Yes.
Because this is the safe place to do it.
Yes. And I want to hear more about that too, and about your journey, because you have been through a lot of change in your life. And as a soul, what I've noticed in both of our journeys, really, we seek change. For me, it's the crown jewels. Yeah, exactly. So I want to hear more about that right after these brief messages.
We'll return to the program in just a few moments, but first, we wanted to give a special word of thanks to our podcast partners, Supportek Staffing. Supportek Staffing is an innovative staffing agency built on the principle of caring about employers and employees as they navigate these new workforce and workplace challenges. If you're an employer, they want to be your human resource partner and help with the changes needed during the pandemic. If you're a candidate, they want to become your lifelong career agent to help you grow into your fullest potential. Supportek prioritizes support over volume, integrity over profits, and will treat your business and your career as if it was their own. You can learn more at supportekstaffing.com. That's SUPPORTEK staffing.com. And finally, we want to give a special word of thanks to Center for the Healing Arts. Center for the Healing Arts is one of the first dedicated group practices devoted to challenging, supportive, and nurturing therapy. Their dedicated therapists have a wide range of expertise, including relationship and couples therapy, individual therapy, addictions, neurofeedback, play therapy for children, adolescents, and families, and therapy for blended family issues. They also regularly offer day-long intensive workshops for relationships, addiction recovery, adult children of alcoholics, and healing trauma in the LGBTQ+ community. For more information, head over to centerforthehealingarts.com or call 407-657-8555, extension 1. We now return you to this week's episode of The Authentic Spiritual Journey with your host, Reverend Cynthia_Alice_Anderson.
Welcome back. We're glad you're with us. And we have with us today on the show Rev John McLean. We're here in the field recording at Unity of Nashville. And I know our listeners are enjoying this, John, because I'm enjoying it. And we have a real similar consciousness, to the listeners, that we love to talk about relating our spiritual walk and looking at life, rather, from a spiritual perspective. It's like we believe that ultimately we're here to grow, prosper, and evolve. And we know one of the ways we evolve is to change. So right before the break, we were talking a little bit about that. So tell me a little bit more about where you were going with that, because I know our listeners would want to hear also about your journey.
Yeah, I think being comfortable with change, or as Buddhists would say, with uncertainty, with ambiguity, being comfortable in ambiguity, it can be exhausting, but it's really required for a healthy life, which will allow us to always not be reacting. I've been privileged to be senior minister in 3 different churches over the last 18 years. And each time I arrive, I'll always say, is anybody here from New York? And some people will raise their hands. And I say, when you're from New York, you learn how to ride the subway. You don't go through the subway with your knees locked. You always know to stand with your knees flexed just a wee bit, because as it bounces along, you want to ride easily over the bumps. If you don't, your head is going up and down the whole time, and your teeth are chattering. And that is so much like life. You just got to keep your knees flexed to absorb the bumps and the changes. Now, it's a cute metaphor. It's practical, and it's a real one. It's a real practice. But we don't often embrace it. We don't often make the effort. And we're all human. And somehow, that lizard brain of ours, it's all the lizard's brain fault.
I know it is.
Yeah, poor thing, poor amygdala, it's all its fault. It's just trying to do a simple job. But it doesn't really work for human beings. Everything is not something to be afraid of.
Right.
And that's what that function is. It's supposed to be afraid of everything. You can't live like that.
You can't. And we do all get comfortable, there's been a lot in, like pop psychology where we'll say, move out of your comfort zone. But I think people, words like that get thrown around now. We don't really even know what they mean. But what I think it means is that we, have to take on we have to risk pretty much on a daily basis, or else we get so comfortable we don't even know we're in a comfort zone. There's an idea that, when nothing that we say or do or believe is challenged, then, there's this kind of slow going to sleep that I feel is prevalent in all of America, if you want to know the truth. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But change is the language of the soul. That's how I talk about it.
Change is the language of the soul. Nice. And curiosity is really, really important. And, as we all live in the world we're in now, things are really different than they ever were in the history of humanity.
Yes.
This is the first time that old people are sharing the experience of old age with their children. 70-year-old children taking care of 95-year-old parents.
Exactly.
You know, like I'll tell you my Medicare plan B and you tell me your Medicare. I mean, people haven't lived this long ever in the history of the planet.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And willingness to change, the ability in the soul, one of the soul's capacities, I think, is curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
To be curious, because we're here a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not willing to be curious and engage curiosity actively and challenge ourselves to change regularly, our worlds will get smaller and smaller and smaller. And we will find us living in your 80s and 90s and hundreds, which is not uncommon.
Right.
Not remotely uncommon to be over 100.
Right.
In such diminished ways. And I think that is a great tragedy.
Yes.
The diminished capacity. So the willingness to be unstuck.
Yes, I think a willingness to change is a very important part of a vital spiritual life. Vital life in general, but certainly spiritual life, which is what our work is focused on here. But, I find any change in any area of my life always moves me forward spiritually, because any change, causes me to readjust. At first, it causes I love this word, perturbation in my activities.
Perturbation.
It's a great word, because it's like when your washer has a big blanket in it, and it gets off center, it goes thump, 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 thump. It's like, when you're starting a new behavior, everything has to shift. And for a while, it's a little weird.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's great imagery. Yeah.
So I think that's what challenges us and keeps us from doing it, because it takes effort. And when life is already feeling hard, I think that's why there's, resistance to change. But I think if we realize that change was really the language of the soul, and that every time we changed, there was an opportunity for us to evolve just a little, that people would be more, not only, less fearful, but would in fact initiate it. And I think sometimes I can slow down a little bit on the initiation, but I think initiating change really in a large way puts you in the driver's seat of your life, because you are heading a direction, and if you're heading a direction and learning new things, then the universe is going to rush to support that effort. Because, as you say, it's in harmony.
It's in harmony. And that's been my experience.
Yes.
That's been my experience. The type of things I talk about, I only have the nerve to talk about them because it's been my experience to be helpful. Not because I read it in a book or I was told to say this. And that has been my experience as well.
Yes. Well, and I wanted you to talk to our listeners a little bit about your practice, because, I think we talk a lot about the spiritual journey, we talk a lot about the soul, and people go, well, how do you do it? And they've heard a lot about my journey, like, what are you doing and what's important to you right now? Just tell us. And it doesn't have to be just anything in your practice.
In my practice, where I am right now is I am making the effort to live according to a monk's schedule. And I fail at this every day. But, I sit mostly in quiet contemplation. And on a good day, when I would call a day a good day, it's when things have been in balance.
Yes.
That I have had time to sit in contemplation, that I've had a good first 3 solid hours of work, and I can take a break, and then I will direct my energies elsewhere in the afternoon. And I don't have great work habits, I admit to that, because there's a part of me that would rather, unless I'm doing something or out of town, I like to work very purposefully every day.
Yes. Yeah.
I like to create spaciousness around me, and I don't ever hurry.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been one of the great gifts of this time of quarantine, where everybody's been forced to not be in a hurry.
Mm-hmm.
And I cannot tell you the numbers of people, everybody that I talk to is so thrilled to not be in the car all the time, to not be hurrying from one meeting to this meeting, to meet this person for coffee,
Mm-hmm.
to meet this person for lunch. And the amount of time and psychic energy
Mm-hmm.
that we chew up when we're traveling around, hurrying to make these obligations. It's crazy making.
Mm-hmm.
And, there have been a lot of gifts from this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the gift of presence is huge.
Yeah.
Just being able to be present to yourself and your needs. And, really that's mindfulness. That's another word that gets thrown around a lot is mindful. Just having moments.
Yes.
And space around what it is you're doing.
Yes.
Is mindfulness.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not something you have to go learn. We already know how to do it, but setting up our lives in a way that there is space for that, brings a spiritual tone and a spiritual nature to life.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I'll confess, I'll tell all my secrets. Why not? One of the things that I've done this year is I have a little fire pit.
Yeah.
And I found, even in the warmer weather and in the colder weather, the very best time for me is in the late afternoon, around 4:00. And I like to sit outside and have a fire. And it's usually about an hour. And I make the effort to simply listen.
Yes.
And, in the warmer weather, when I wasn't having a fire, one of the things that I so enjoyed, and I did this every day because I wanted to create a very specific kind of mindfulness, that I would first listen to the cicadas.
Oh, yes.
And as it got darker and a little bit cooler, there would be this moment when the cicadas would start to slow down, and then the tree frogs would start to chirp, and then the cicadas would be all gone, and it would be all tree frogs once it's dark.
Mm.
And I really love that moment of that change. Mm-hmm. You can call it mindful. I call it spaciousness, because for me, the hallmark of any spiritual experience is spaciousness.
I agree. Mm-hmm.
Where you are not impinged by the everyday anything, but you feel yourself a part of it, or from where we started, from the highest point of view, just another critter sitting out in the backyard listening to the other critters as some go to bed for the night and some wake up to do their business. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And to frame myself that way, which always allows me to think there's nothing I have to do, there's nothing I have to read, there's nowhere to go, there's something to remember.
Yes.
That I am a part of this. Mm-hmm. This too is me.
Yes. Yes.
And just as I am.
Yes.
I'm complete.
Well, today when we were out on our hike, we both find a lot of peace outside, and I feel most connected really to spirit when I'm outside. And it's not like there's a specific doing, like you're saying. It's just a beingness, and there's a quietness, there is a spaciousness, there is like this awareness. And I've discovered over the years, I've always spent hours and hours and hours outside, not just 10 minutes here and 30 minutes here.
No, I know that about you.
Hours.
Yes.
And it's like it is inside of you. Over time, you realize that you could be in a New York subway and feel that spaciousness. You don't have to be outside. You can take it with you. And so I think that's so important for our listeners to know that, just you having spaciousness in your life making space for yourself in your process, is in fact spiritual.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we minimize that. If we haven't read about it, or somebody hasn't told us to do it, or it's not in the book we just read of 5 Steps to Happiness, that, that somehow we're not doing it right. But in that moment is the divine.
And we all get caught up on that.
Yes.
Of having to be right and having to do it right.
Yes.
Which again, it really is where we need to be when we're 2, 3, 4 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're acquiring the craft we need to be a human being.
Mm-hmm.
But we've acquired it by the time we're 5 or 6 or 7.
Mm-hmm.
And we rarely ask more of ourselves than what we learned when we were 5 or 6 or 7.
It's true. It's true. And I think our listeners must be about change and about evolving, because that's all we talk about. So we're coming to the end of our time together. I'm hoping, friends, that you are touched by this, that you're even sensing the energy, because as we talked in the first half, there was a wonderful energy, and it was about the world. But there's a different energy now. And my guess is you're feeling it through the airwaves. I'm always amazed what can be felt energetically.
Field of grace.
That's right. And I feel that now. Just talking about your journey.
Yeah.
The spaciousness, bringing in that element of fire.
Yes.
We feel that.
Yeah. Yeah.
We feel that.
Yeah.
And so, friend, in your journey, as you've joined us today, we hope that you're going to find ways for yourself. We share our journey, not to say this is what to do, but that we share our journey to give you hope, to give you peace, and to know, yes, you can find your own way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we're here learning every day about our own journey through our spiritual experiences and through our friendship. So I know you'll join me in thanking Rev John.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Authentic Spiritual Journey, presented by Supportek Staffing and Center for the Healing Arts. This channel is also made possible because of listeners just like you. If you would like to support the channel with your tax-deductible contribution on an ongoing basis or through a one-time gift, head over to experienceofthesoul.com/support. The Authentic Spiritual Journey is copyright 2021 Cynthia Alice Anderson, all rights reserved. Our theme music is composed by Dave Croft and used with permission from RR Hot Publishing. The Experience of the Soul podcast channel is a production of 818 Studios.